Today, we're discussing how people pleasing is detrimental. My name is Amy Ballantyne. Welcome to Power to the People Pleasers. I'm so excited to have my guest, Carolyn, here. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You know, Carolyn, you have such a cool job. Carolyn is the owner of Hire Possibilities. She empowers hiring managers and job seekers to ace their next interview. I'm sure if you are looking for a job, that sounds good to you. And she has worked in tech for 16 plus years as a program manager, most recently at Amazon. You know, I'm excited for our conversation today, Carolyn. But before we jump into this, I always ask my guests, have you ever been a people pleaser? And if so, how did that show up in your life?
I have definitely been a people pleaser. I mean, I think it's usually part of women's conditioning, at least in our current society. And so it's shown up in a lot of ways. I mean, all the way from in my career to motherhood to balancing all of that is probably where it shows up the most. So every day I'm kind of taking a step back to think of, am I making this decision for myself or am I making this decision to please someone else?
Yeah, that's a very powerful question to be asking yourself. I think that if all of us were to ask that question even a little bit more often, it would make a big difference, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's jump into all these people who are listening, who are on the job hunt. This is a real situation. First, I'd love to know, how did you get into this work being the hiring coach? I'm very curious.
Yeah. So before this, I was a program manager at Amazon, senior program manager. And I was loving my job there, but I was also in this extracurricular role at Amazon, which is called a bar raiser. And a bar raiser is someone who is on interviews for other organizations within the company. And it's someone who's kind of been tapped as a really good interviewer. And I was having a lot of hiring managers kind of chase me down and say, hey, can you do a bunch of these? And you're supposed to do 2 a week. But by the time I left Amazon, I was doing like 6 to 8 a week. So it was taking a lot of my time. But that was mostly because I just really loved it. And then when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, I was trying to decide if I was going to come back to Amazon or if I was going to quit. And I realized that if that bar raiser aspect of my job had been my entire role, I would have absolutely been back there. But it was extracurricular. It was just kind of a extra thing to put on my annual performance review. And so I decided to turn it into a job for myself instead, which has been a really great experience.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm sure you're making a difference for a lot of people. So let's dive into this. How people pleasing is detrimental. Tell me, how is it
Absolutely.
detrimental?
So it's detrimental actually for both job seekers and hiring managers, but we can focus on job seekers first because I know that a lot of folks are looking for jobs right now. There have been a lot of layoffs, as we know, especially in the tech industry. So I know a lot of folks are looking for tips and tricks. The way that it really comes across as a job seeker is that when a lot of people are prepping for their interviews, they tend to think, what does this person want to hear from me? Versus what's a really great example of this I can give someone to show how I am in the workplace. And one really obvious way that that becomes detrimental is that a lot of companies are currently using behavioral interview questions. And those questions are all about asking about a specific situation that happened in someone's past versus, in the past, they used to ask a lot of hypothetical or idealistic questions like, what would you do in this situation? But now that there's been a shift to actual data and information from someone's past experience, it really doesn't work to try to give someone the answer that you think that they want because you're never going to give them, what they're looking for. And they're not looking for perfection. They're looking for, kind of the nitty-gritty details of what happened.
Yeah, the real deal. And so on that kind of lane that we're on, would you say in preparation, then it's not looking for what you think that they want to hear? It's being prepared by having fresh in your mind some stories of moments that actually happened for you.
Exactly. And actually, you don't want them to be, you want them to be good examples of, meeting or exceeding your goals, but you also want there to be challenges in that story so that they can see how you really dealt with hard times and what you would do differently if you were to redo it. That's the sort of information they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what about for the hiring manager?
Mhm. So I think it's obvious to people why it would be challenging for the job seeker, especially with the power dynamic in an interview. You're obviously
Mhm.
looking for a job, but this can also come across with the hiring manager because, especially if you're hiring for the first time or you're still early on in your hiring journey, or you're hiring out of desperation because you really need someone as quickly as possible, then you're likely to fall into kind of a people pleasing trap where you might be asking a ton of questions and trying to seem really friendly and trying to just find the right person quickly. But you're not actually getting the information that you need from the person that you're interviewing to know if they're going to be the right fit. And unfortunately, when you don't make the right hiring choice, you can cost yourself a lot of time, money, sanity. It's really challenging. So, yeah,
Mhm.
it's important to invest in your interviewing skills if you're a hiring manager.
Awesome. Well, I hear you on that it can be really challenging if you make the wrong choice up front. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about people pleasing and this reality of not coming across as authentic. Can you share a time when that might have happened? A candidate sitting across from you in one of these interviews that you did with Amazon.
Sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of times this would happen with people who are doing some of their first interviews or in more
Mhm.
junior roles, or even women who are returning to the workplace after taking some time off or after having a job, same job for 10 years, same company. And I think it really just comes across as rehearsed. There are a lot of examples of, just being able to provide the very high level response to my question. But when I drilled in and asked a lot of follow up questions, not a lot of substance, not a lot of memory around specifics of what happened in the situation. Um,
Mhm.
and it's, the structure of those interviews is really asking just 2 or 3 high level questions. But most of my questions are follow up questions like, what tools did you use? How did you know that that was successful? Who did you work with?
Mhm.
What was their reaction to what you did? So really remembering all of that stuff in high detail is important.
Yeah. And can you clarify? So if I was listening, the question that's coming to my mind is, okay, so I'm preparing for an interview. I'm not, but if I was
Mhm.
preparing for an interview, is it better to have, you've looked over the job description, you've got ideas on what question might be asked, and then you plan to say, what were the resources, what were the like you plan it yourself, or you wait and hope for the follow-up questions to come, because some people may not be as great of interviewers as you, and there may not be an opportunity for follow-up to like add on.
That's true. So I would say I always tell people not to over prepare. This is the other issue with being a people
Mm.
pleaser is you might feel like you need to spend hours and hours and hours preparing, but that's actually going to make you come across as way more over rehearsed and less
Yeah.
authentic. And so I try to find a balance of preparing a little bit, looking at that job description, like you mentioned, looking for specific skills or things that they're going to be asking you about, and then really just think about a couple situations where you can go into great detail. So probably more recent examples are good.
Mhm.
You want to make sure it's the right scope for the role you're interviewing for. So is it a really big project because you're interviewing for a senior role? That's really important. But don't try to overthink all of the details and all of the
Mhm.
specifics they might ask you, because you want it to come across very conversational. No matter what they ask, you want to just be able to answer any question. And it's always okay to say, I don't remember, or I don't know, but you want to pick situations that you remember as much detail as possible with.
Yeah, and I think you made the link there on, we want to be authentic. Perfectionism is not authentic,
Yep,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And you mentioned when we were meeting initially about this idea of making a good connection. What are some tips that you would give for people on how to make a good connection in that, it's really a short period of time?
It absolutely is. So I think that this advice can go for both job seekers and hiring managers or interviewers. Though I do feel like because of the power dynamic, a lot of this responsibility falls with the interviewer because they're really going to set the stage for the environment and how the interaction goes. But what I always recommend is, being very open, being very friendly. I hate telling people to smile, but smiling is
Sometimes
good.
you have to,
It shows, it shows that you're friendly, leaning forward, all of that body language that really shows that you're happy to be there. You're happy to be meeting someone. You feel like it's a good use of your time. And then I think making sure that you have the right questions to ask. So both job seekers and hiring managers or interviewers should have good questions that they've been thoughtful about so that it's a really meaningful connection. And I think that, for job seekers, it's obviously showing that you've done some research, you're invested in the role or the company or the person. And then also just being vulnerable. So it's probably likely that the interviewer is going to ask a question that makes you get a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit vulnerable with something that happened or a weakness that you might perceive that you have. And hopefully the interviewer is also matching your vulnerability so that they can make a connection and you kind of end up having this, conversation that clicks. For me as an interviewer, that's what I always strive for, is saying like, I know that's hard to talk about. Maybe here's an example at this company that I've had, or really trying to make a genuine connection and make the most of that time.
And, I think sometimes we drop words like be open and body language. I'd love if you could go into a little bit more detail, because you will have sat in on many, many interviews and led many interviews. What is body language that is open and helps you create that connection?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, making eye contact, leaning forward, it sounds kind of weird when you're actually doing it.
This is what people need to know, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, leaning forward, making sure that kind of your shoulders are spread apart instead of kind of hunched over. You don't want to be super slouchy and, seem like you don't really feel like you deserve to be there. You want to take up a little bit more space. You don't want to be looking too much at notes or looking at your phone or the clock or, messing with your hair or any of that stuff. You want to really just show that your focus is the conversation.
Yeah. I think also, to add to all of those things like not jingling your money in your pockets, right? Or fiddling, you've found a piece of paper and you're fiddling, right? Really aiming to be present, like hands clasped or in your lap, comfortable, right?
Yes.
So it's not
Yes.
distracting yourself from being able to give that answer, or the people who are trying to pay attention, but there's something that you're doing that's like so awkward, right? So what tips do you give? I know you're saying to not over prepare. I love that, especially for people pleasers. Seriously. Um, is there a layer of, at least though, knowing what you do in an interview kind of experience, like having a little bit of practice, if you haven't been in an interview setting for a long time, or if you're brand new, what do you say to people like that?
Yeah. So I would say, the best way to do it, if you can, is to practice with another person.
Yeah.
So you can do that either through, pretending with your partner or your friend that you're in an interview and having them interview you and then give you feedback afterwards, or a mock interview with a hiring coach is similar. You could even ask for informational interviews from other people in your industry or other companies. And that way it's very, low intensity. You're not actually interviewing for a job, but you do need to be professional. And you can even ask them afterwards, if you feel comfortable, a couple of days later, like, hey, I'm really trying to practice my interviews. Did you find me professional? Is there any advice you would give me as I'm going into my interviews? And it's a good way to just get more information about, other companies or meet a mentor. So that's usually what I recommend is including another person in the process is going to make you feel more confident.
Yeah, for sure. And you also mentioned this concept of being the right fit. So from the side of the person looking for the job, talk a little bit about right fit and people pleasing. How does that all work?
So it is really important to consider if the job is the right fit for you, not just if you're the right fit for the job. And this is obviously something that we have to acknowledge privilege around, because people might not be in a position where they can be picky about a job. They might just need whatever job they can get. So totally understand that. But if you are in a situation where you can be a little bit more choosy about your job, then it's really important to ask the questions that you need to ask during the interview to make sure you know it's the right fit. And I think as a people pleaser, you're way more focused generally on making sure you get the job. But then if you get the offer, you have to take some time and say, do I actually want this job? Obviously, I did a really great job, proving to them that I was a good fit, but do I actually want this? So I think really doing your research about the company, knowing what questions to ask, making sure that the person gives you time to ask and for them to answer those questions, at least 5 minutes at the end of the interview, is super important. And ask about your deal breakers. That's really my number one thing. Don't worry about how it comes across. When I went to Amazon, I had heard a lot of things about, how hard they were working people, burnout, all of that stuff. And I had been working at a digital agency, and I'd been working 90 hours a week. And so for me, it was really important that I stopped doing that. And so for every single person on my loop, I asked them, how many hours do you work? And are you successful with that? Do you get pressure to work more hours than that? And it felt a little bit uncomfortable because I was really kind of, interrogating them back. But I got really great information, and it allowed me to step into Amazon with boundaries and feeling really confident in that. So any deal breakers, ask those questions.
Any other examples? Like, what are some other examples of deal breakers that you've heard that, to trigger people to think about these things?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one right now is returning to office or working from home, especially in the tech industry.
Yeah.
A lot of people, may find that working from home works really well for them. And I think a lot of the big tech companies are kind of testing the waters with different policies to see what works. But I've heard several people, choose Microsoft over Amazon because of the return to office policy.
Interesting.
So that's another one. Or for me, one of my boundaries was I didn't put work email on my phone because it was a trigger for me. And so some companies require that they can contact you at any time, or they require overtime hours. That's something that I would definitely investigate. You can ask questions about, benefits. You can ask questions about maternity leave if you want to. It's technically illegal for them to, not hire you because you're interested in having a family in the future. It can sometimes be risky, but it would be illegal for them to not give you a role based on that question. So it's really up to you how important those things are.
Yeah. What I really liked about what you shared there is this idea of, by asking the questions, you're taking control of, is this the right fit for me? And getting clear. I also like, from the people pleaser's perspective, you are being more upfront about these areas of boundaries, which may in the past not have been something you've maintained or held strong on, right? And I don't mean you, I mean anyone listening, right? And so I love that as a tip for people to recognize that in this moment of seeking a new job, you have the opportunity to lead yourself, be that leader in your life, and get more clear on what wasn't working for you at previous workplaces, and ask the questions that get you the clarity, and give them a bit of clarity around who you are as a person, that you are a leader, that you are someone who's going to ask for perhaps not having your email on your phone, and that might give them an insight into the quality of person that you are, that you're going to work super hard while you're at work, but you also want to maintain that work-life balance. You want to maintain that level of mental health and sanity, in my opinion, to be able to separate. So that is awesome. Awesome wisdom especially for our people pleasers, and all people, I think, to hear. Is there anything else as we near the end that you believe is vital to be sharing with these individuals who are job hunting and may or may not be people pleasers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is always helping people with a mindset as, coming into the room. How do you want to be feeling? How do you want to be presenting yourself? The mindset that I most often see with folks who aren't feeling very confident, who are feeling like they really need to be impressing people, is that desperation kind of mindset and the desperation body language that comes across. And I think as much as you can, and again, noting the privilege and being able to say this, but as much as you can, separating yourself and the way you feel about yourself from the outcome of the interview is extremely important. Choosing a really tangible goal for yourself that doesn't have anything to do with getting the job.
Yeah.
So it could be, I'm going to ask a question that's really hard for me to ask, or I'm going to meet someone I could potentially, meet up with again later on, even if I don't get the job. Picking a small goal for yourself and using it to remove yourself from the outcome is really the best way to remove the desperation from your mindset. And then it's not going to come across to the interviewer that you're desperate, like, I really need this job, which is kind of the biggest turnoff you can give someone in an interview.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, very great advice. And you had offered a free interview prep workbook. Can you share a little bit about that? And I'll drop the link in the show notes.
Yes. So I, on my website, have a free interview question workbook. It's helpful for both job seekers and hiring managers and helps you think through follow-up questions that you can use and you can answer. And they're really the ones that I use the most in all of my interviews. And I use them across all different job positions, not just program managers. I've used them with designers, economists, developers, people who are working in fulfillment centers, people who are working with AWS. So they really can be used for any role. And they're free. So just sign up. And then in the future, I'll also be offering a course on my website. So if you sign up, I'll have your email to send you that information as well.
Very, very awesome, Carolyn. So how can people connect with you? And I'll be sure to drop the links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is to go to my website, which is hirepossibilitiesseattle.com. And that's hire as in HIRE, hire. And then I also have an Instagram, although I've been making some changes as far as my social media content. And so once that's, up and running again, that's another great place to follow me.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much for your incredible wisdom and your beautiful energy this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
And to all of our listeners of Power to the People Pleasers, so grateful to have you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode coming